Welcome to another masterclass here to Mind for All Seasons. I'm excited to talk today about putting emotional intelligence to work for you. And I think that emotional intelligence is one of those rare skills that just can't be taken over by AI or other technologies. It's fundamental to being human. And I don't think enough of us are as intentional as we could be about emotional intelligence. So let's break down what EQ is, why it's so important, why I think it's the defining characteristic of great leaders, and then let's get a little bit more tactical and talk about specific things that we can be doing in our own lives, our own approaches, and in the approach that we have toward other people and how we're supporting them that can help us all get better results in our lives and in our work and every interaction that we have with other people. So, for starters, when I show a picture like this to groups of people at conferences, I often ask them, what is it that you see? What do you think you're looking at? And I get all sorts of responses. Well, it's clearly a close-up of something, and it's dots of color. Sometimes people say, well, it looks a little bit like pixels, like on a screen where you have a pixelated image. But most people have a difficult time identifying what it is. When you zoom out and you really look with a broader perspective, you can see, oh, it's a picture of Steve Jobs. Now, interestingly, it's made with bubble wrap, and some really inventive artist decided to take paint and fill up syringes with paint and inject paint into each little bubble of some bubble wrap. I'm always amazed at the creativity of humans and what they can do. And this was an impressive way to create a pixelated image. But this is also a reminder that sometimes when we're really close to something, we don't see the forest for the trees. We don't see the bigger picture. We don't understand how things fit together. And when it comes to our interactions with other humans, I think sometimes we get caught up in little minute details and we're not seeing the broader picture. And it's easy to slip into that because we don't have as much context. We don't see as much of the person's life and experience and certainly their thoughts as they would see and understand. And so we end up with a little bit of a skewed perspective, and that can get us into trouble. Part of developing greater intelligence is learning to back away and see the broader picture and understand how things fit in context and begin to see why people do the things that they do. A great example of an emotionally intelligent response comes from a book by the Arbinger Institute. And I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the Arbinger Institute's work before we're through here today. But they talk about an experience in a skilled nursing facility with a lady who moved in named Mrs. Tham. And Mrs. Tham was from overseas. She was visiting in the United States when she had a health emergency, and she wound up in the hospital. And after that, she was discharged to a skilled nursing facility. And the staff were struggling. They would bring her food and she would throw it across the room and she would yell at them. And it seemed like things were going south in a hurry. And so at one meeting with the executive team, the whole meeting was focused on what a problem Mrs. Tham was and what needed to happen to discharge her because they felt like she was disruptive to the entire community. What they couldn't see is that they were not seeing the bigger picture. It's kind of like they were zoomed in on that blister wrap and they couldn't see what was actually going on. And then right at the end of the meeting, right before they were going to break and go off to their other things and figure out how they were going to discharge Mrs. Tham so that they could all have some peace and quiet, one of the team members asked a question that caused everybody to turn outward and to zoom out and to see the broader picture. This team member said, I wonder what Mrs. Tham feels like. I wonder what it's like to be her. And they stopped. And the team said, well, what do you mean? What are you looking at? And she said, well, I just got thinking about the fact that she's away from her country. She doesn't speak English. She probably has no idea what's going on. She's probably terrified. And with that, the whole team sat down and they started looking at Mrs. Tham very differently. They started seeing her as a person. They started wondering what she was communicating through all of the behavior that she was engaged in. And pretty soon they started solving challenges. The chef said, well, I actually know someone that has recipes from her country. Maybe I could make some food that would be more familiar to her. I could go to a market and get some of the foods that she might enjoy. And another team member said, I know some people that work on language translation. Maybe we could get a translator in to help communicate more effectively and help her know what it is that's going on and why she's here and what we're going to do on her behalf and how we're going to try to help her be able to get better so that she can go back home to her country. Very quickly, things turned around and they had a better experience with Mrs. Tham because they were focused on her, not on her behavior. That's an emotionally intelligent thing to do. And there are specific steps that can get us there faster and even help us have the habit of behaving in emotionally intelligent ways. So, if we're going to develop emotional intelligence, one of the first things that we have to do is understand what it actually is. Emotional intelligence is a term that was coined by Daniel Goleman. And Daniel Goleman said that emotional intelligence is the ability to recognize and connect with and learn from and manage one's emotional state, and the ability to recognize, connect with, learn from, and influence the emotional state of other people. Notice the difference between managing and influencing. We get to manage our own emotional state if we'll choose to be in charge of that. Some of us might manage it poorly, others might do it really well, but we get to manage ourselves. We can't manage other people. We can only influence them. And if you're a healthcare professional, you're probably familiar with the term behavior management plans. I actually think they should be called behavior influence plans because, after all, we can't manage someone else's behavior. Our job is to influence them in positive ways. And the example of Mrs. Tham is a really good example of how influence comes from the mindset that we're operating under. Daniel Goleman talks about several domains of emotional intelligence, and we're going to break these down. But the domains that allow a person to really be said to have emotional intelligence are self-awareness and self-regulation and motivation, empathy, and social skill. So what about self-awareness? If we're self-aware, then we have the ability to recognize and understand our moods and our drives and how they're affecting others as we interact with them. It's like we can see things in real time and understand that when I do this, it causes that behavior in another person. It's a heightened awareness of how the dynamics of the conversation are going and how the dance that's being danced between us and the other person is playing out. Hallmarks of self-awareness, according to Goleman, are self-confidence and having a realistic self-assessment and even having a self-deprecating sense of humor. If you can't laugh at yourself, then it's hard to be as self-aware because we might be just caught up in an anxiety response instead of seeing things in proper perspective and recognizing that none of us is human. Or, excuse me, that all of us are human and none of us is perfect. Self-regulation means that we have the ability to control or redirect disruptive impulses and moods. We're not just on autopilot. We're not just tearing the emotional walls down, so to speak. We're actually in control and we're making choices. And when we can regulate ourselves, that's a hallmark of emotional intelligence. We also have the propensity to suspend judgment. In other words, we think before we act. That's pretty key to being emotionally intelligent. Goleman says that the hallmarks of self-regulation are when we're trustworthy, when we act with integrity. I like the definition of integrity you probably heard before, that integrity is doing the thing that you said that you would do when nobody's watching, when you don't seem to have a risk of not doing it, but you just do it because you committed to it. That's an emotionally intelligent thing to do. If you're comfortable with ambiguity, you're good at self-regulation. If you're open to change, that's another hallmark of self-regulation. What about motivation? Goleman describes motivation as a passion to work for reasons that go beyond money or status. And it's a propensity to pursue goals with energy and with persistence. And the hallmarks of motivation are a strong drive to achieve, people who are optimistic even in the face of failure, because they don't define it as a failure. They define it as an opportunity to learn, and commitment to an organization. What about empathy? When we're empathetic, we understand the emotional makeup of other people. Now, I think that starts with self-awareness. We have to be aware of what's going on in ourselves before we can begin to really understand what's going on in other people. We also have skill in treating people according to their emotional reactions when we're behaving with empathy. We can see where someone is. We can recognize that they're in distress, and we can do something about it. And we have some degree of skill in reaching out to them and doing things that are helpful. Now, in a lot of our interactions as humans, I think most people interact on the basis of what they think is deserved. It's an entirely different thing to ask ourselves the question, what would be helpful? So instead of what is deserved or justified in an interaction, asking what's helpful might cause us to do some things that may even seem unjustified. For example, when I was learning to have greater empathy for one of my sons when he was a young teenager and he was struggling to understand his own emotions, there was a day where he just seemed belligerent. He was talking back and he was not wanting to engage in the chores that I was asking him to help with. And I was at first just trying to push him a little bit further and saying, well, this is what we're doing and we need to do it. And it wasn't a very empathetic thing to do because I wasn't seeing that he was in distress and I wasn't doing something that would be helpful. And when I shifted and I tried a different approach and I said, sounds like you're really frustrated. Sounds like something's bothering you. When he sat with that for a minute, he actually just broke down and started crying. And he said, I'm not sure what's going on. I'm frustrated. And I just gave him a hug and I let him cry. And when he got that out as a 13-year-old boy, things started going better. We were able to have a real conversation. The wall came down and he was able to talk about what he was feeling. And we were able to find meaningful ways of moving forward. And then he chose to do what it was that I was inviting him to do. So, hallmarks of empathy are expertise in building and retaining talent, cross-cultural sensitivity, and service to clients and customers. Empathetic people are really good servants of others. What about social skill? Well, when we have good social skill, Daniel Goleman says we're proficient in managing relationships and building networks. We have the ability to find common ground and build rapport. And the hallmarks of good social skill include effectiveness in leading out when we have to change things, and persuasiveness and expertise in building and leading teams. So, if we take all of those descriptions of emotional intelligence and we start thinking about something that I posed earlier, my belief that emotional intelligence is one of the defining characteristics of great leaders, especially in the 21st century, then we might ask ourselves, why is that? It sounds good, but why would it be one of the most important characteristics? I personally think the number one reason is because of our two brains. We have a thinking brain and a feeling brain. You might call the thinking brain technically the prefrontal cortex, and the feeling brain is the limbic brain. Interestingly, the feeling brain, the limbic brain, has no capacity for language, but it's the part of the brain that allows us to first initiate action. There are cases of people who have had damage to the limbic brain. And these people have frontal lobes that are pretty intact, and they can tell you all the things that they should be doing, and even why they should be doing them, and how they should be doing them. But they can't seem to move forward and initiate action. Because without the limbic brain working the way that it should, action just doesn't really happen. So if we're going to influence people, if we're going to lead them effectively, the very first thing that we have to do is connect with them on an emotional level. Whether it's buying or choosing to follow or working hard in an organization, that all requires emotional intelligence and the ability to connect with someone at that limbic brain emotional level, because that's what gets them moving in the first place. People buy things and people do things based on emotion. So, one of the places that we can turn to learn a lot more about how to be emotionally intelligent in a practical way are the three books that you see pictured here on the screen. The Arbinger Institute, if you're not familiar with them, is an organization that has helped everyone from individuals to world governments and everything in between, including a lot of businesses, learn how to deal with conflict more effectively. And you can't deal with conflict effectively if you don't have a high degree of emotional intelligence. So it's something that they've actively researched and taught about for many, many years. Now, I read a lot. I love to learn, and I like to share what I'm learning with others. But there are very few books that I've read in my entire life outside of scripture that have had as big an impact on my life as these three books. And I unreservedly recommend them if you haven't read them. These books identify the fact that as humans, we have two mindsets. And our success in life is really determined in a lot of ways by which mindset we use. We can have an outward mindset or we can have an inward mindset. And it's mindset that really drives behavior as much as anything. We can focus a lot on changing behavior, but behavior is an outgrowth of mindset. And when we take the time to change our mindset and to actively work on it, we naturally start getting much better results with other people. So consider that if we're seeing others as objects, that's mindset option number one. When you see others as objects, according to the Arbinger Institute, there are only three possibilities. They're either a vehicle that we're using, they are an obstacle in our path, or they're irrelevant to us. None of us like to be treated as an object. I've often joked with people that if you take an object, like the cell phone, and you drop kick it, an object will go in whatever direction you kick it. But when you kick a person, they kick you back. So if you're seeing someone as a vehicle, here's what that looks like. Let's suppose that you have a resident living in an assisted living community, and you can go in and assist her with anything. She never fights. She never argues. You can do anything that's on the care plan. Now, if she doesn't come out of her room, she insists on eating meals in her room, but she'll eat all of her meal. She'll allow you to bathe her. There's no problems. It's very easy to see someone like that as an easy resident in an assisted living community. And we can treat that kind of a person as a vehicle that allows us to feel good about ourselves, that allows us to have a sense that, oh, we're getting the job done. We're doing everything just right. We're really good as a staff member. But what we might be missing if we're seeing her as an object and not as a person is the fact that earlier in life, she was very social. She was the life of the party. She loved to be around people. She never missed a good meal or party with others. And the fact that she's now in her room refusing to come out should be a huge warning sign that something is seriously wrong. She's not doing very well. But as long as we're caught up in completing tasks and just trying to feel good about ourselves and getting things done, then we are missing the glaring reality that would be right in front of us if we saw her as a person instead of as an object. Now, if someone's an obstacle in your path, that's kind of like how the skilled nursing team was treating Mrs. Tham when she was yelling and throwing food and outwardly seeming to resist care. They just weren't looking at her as a person. And so she became an obstacle in their path. She was the obstacle between that community and peace for everybody else. When she would yell, it would disrupt everyone else. And so they just saw her as an obstacle. And it wasn't until they started seeing her as a person that things went a little bit differently. Now, suppose you were working in that facility with Mrs. Tham and she was yelling, but she was in the A wing and you were assigned to the B wing. If you walked past the A wing and you heard Mrs. Tham yell and you thought to yourself, well, at least I'm not assigned to the A wing because I don't want to deal with a yeller tonight. That's what it's like when you're treating someone as irrelevant. And that never feels good to the individual that we're treating as irrelevant, and it doesn't solve the problem. If we want to get further, we have to get out of the box. And the Arbinger Institute routinely points out that when you are seeing others as objects, that's being in the box. So when we see others as objects, it leads to a really big problem called collusion. Collusion fundamentally is when our behavior is provoking more of the behavior in the other person that we don't want. When I first learned about this, I was working as an administrator in a memory care community. And I sat back and I thought about what I was learning, and it dawned on me that every time the state survey team came in, we were engaged in a cycle of collusion. Our behavior as a staff and my behavior as a leader was leading the survey team to behave in ways that caused this cycle of problems. So here's kind of how that would go. When the survey team came in, I would panic. My heart would sink, and I would think, oh, I hope that we're going to get a good survey. I hope we didn't do anything seriously wrong. And I would run around and I would try to quietly tell the staff in between having to talk to the surveyors, hey, survey team is here and we got to be on our best behavior and make sure that we're not messing up in front of them. And our livelihood depends on this in a way. And they would behave in a little bit more panicked way. They would behave a little bit more suspiciously. And if I was a surveyor watching people seem a little bit more panicked, seem a little bit more suspicious, I would start to wonder if maybe they were hiding something. And so I might start looking deeper. I might ask even more questions because the behavior of the staff in the facility would start convincing me that maybe there's something to find here. Maybe there's something wrong. And there wasn't anything seriously wrong, except that I was feeling anxious that the survey team was there, and my team could feel that, and I wasn't setting them up for success, and their behavior caused the surveyors to start digging deeper, which caused more panic on the part of me and the staff, which caused the surveyors to look deeper, and things would spiral, and it was all because of collusion. And it only takes one person to break the cycle of collusion. We do it by turning outward toward the others and seeing what it might be like for them. If I had slowed down and said, I wonder what it's like to be a surveyor. I wonder what it's like to come into a building with a bunch of people that may or may not know me and to have to look for anything that might be wrong and to even write up a facility for that. That kind of puts me in a position of feeling like I'm the enemy. If I could have put myself in their shoes sooner, if I had learned this lesson earlier, I would have had a less stressful time with surveys. Now, we did okay in our surveys. We didn't have any major problems, but I think things would have been a lot more pleasant for everyone had I been warm and welcoming and realized that they were probably just as nervous as I was coming in. I could have broken that cycle of collusion. So when we see others as objects, we have to find justification for our bad opinions. As soon as we label someone and we're aware that we've done that to some degree, we have to find justification for that label. Because if we don't, then that makes us a bad person. If we label someone unfairly, that's not justified. And so we begin looking for examples of how they're living up to that label. And trust me, if you're looking for it, you can find it. You can find all the evidence in the world that someone is a wonderful person or that they're lousy and that they have all kinds of problems. I don't know if any of you have had this experience, but it was interesting in reflection to look back on my experiences in school. I generally did very well in school and I enjoyed school. So I was kind of a happy kid in most of my classes. I loved to learn, and that served me well. But I had some friends who seemed like totally different people from one class to the next. They would do really well in one class and seem to get along beautifully with the teacher. And in other classes, it's like they couldn't do anything right. And later, when I've talked to some people about this, they've admitted that, yeah, for whatever reason, that teacher just seemed to hold it against me. They seemed to hold everything against me. They seemed to treat me like I couldn't do anything right. That's the cycle of collusion. We often respond to the way that others are treating us, and others respond to us the way that we're treating them. If we're treating others as if they were what they should be, and they could be what they should be, then, as the German philosopher Goethe reminds us, people rise up to that. People tend to live up to the expectations that we place upon them, and collusion often gets in the way. It doesn't have to, though, if we will see others as people who have their own goals and their own needs their own mountains to climb, their own challenges that they're trying to overcome. As soon as we turn outward and we recognize that nobody wakes up and looks in the mirror and says, "Hey, you, I hope today we can get out there and wreck our lives." Nobody does that. We're all trying. We're striving to be the best that we can, but we're all flawsome. We are flawed and awesome at the same time. And once we see other people as genuinely doing the best that they can in most cases, but they have their own background and their own needs and their own challenges, then we start to turn a little bit more outward toward people. So, how could we more specifically get out of the box toward others? How do we stop labeling people like I was labeling my son when he was 13 and he was distressed? And at first, I had him in the box and I thought, oh, he's being belligerent and he's being defiant and he's being rude. Those are labels that I could easily look for justification for, but instead, when I turned outward toward him, that's when things changed. How do we do it? Well, the first thing that we need to do is understand what box we might be in. So, courtesy of the Arbinger Institute, I'm going to sum up some things that I learned from the 3 books that I showed you: The Anatomy of Peace, The Outward Mindset, and Leadership and Self-Deception. Those books remind us that one of the boxes we could be in is the better than box. I'm better than that person. I view myself as superior and important and virtuous and right, which means that if I'm going to justify that label for me, that others have to be inferior, they have to be incapable or irrelevant, they got to be wrong, which means that I view the world in terms of competition. And the world is troubled. The world needs me. I'm going to be the superhero to the world. And all of a sudden, we can start getting intoxicated with our own self-importance. And we start feeling impatient with others. We might experience disdainful feelings toward others, and we might also be indifferent. After all, if someone is irrelevant to us, we can be indifferent to them. All of those feelings are signs that we might be caught up in the better than box. We might be caught up in the I deserve box, like I've earned this, or I've been mistreated. I'm a victim, and so therefore I deserve A, B, and C. I might feel unappreciated. And all of that leads me to believe that others are mistaken and they're mistreating me and they're ungrateful, and I deserve better than that. And so fundamentally, I might start viewing the world as unfair or unjust, or that the world owes me something, which is going to cause me to feel entitled or deprived or resentful. Only when we get out of the I deserve box do we start moving past those kinds of difficult feelings. Another label that the Arbinger Institute points out that we might put on ourselves is the I must be seen as fill in the blank. I need to be well thought of, for example. And I might start looking at others as judgmental or threatening, or I might start seeing them as my audience, and I've got to live up to how my audience sees me, which means that the world might feel kind of dangerous. I might feel constantly watched. I might feel like people are judging me all the time because I have to be seen as capable or smart or witty or whatever label I'm putting on myself. And that kind of labeling and in the box thinking might cause me to feel anxious or afraid or needy or stressed or overwhelmed. I might be in the worse than box. I'm not better than other people. What if I'm worse than? Humans almost never correct. We almost always overcorrect. And sometimes people shift from being in the better than box to saying, okay, that's not serving me very well. But then they go right into the worse than box. And they start viewing themselves as inferior or broken, or like fate has struck again and I just can't get away from things. Everything always goes wrong in my life. That's the worse than box, which leads us to view others as, well, they're advantaged or they're privileged or they're blessed. I know people who literally have taught their children, that's not for people like us. That's for other people. That's not for us. That is the worse than box and the label that goes with it. And when we're feeling that we're worse than, it means that the world is hard. It's against us. Or it's just ignoring us. The world's moving on and they don't even care. And that leads us to feel helpless and jealous and angry and bitter and depressed. The Arbinger Institute sums things up by saying when we dehumanize others by putting labels on them, we necessarily dehumanize all that is human, including ourselves. We cannot be fully human and understand our emotional makeup if we're dehumanizing other people. And as soon as we're putting labels on others and either consciously or subconsciously working to find justification for those labels, we're actually dehumanizing ourselves. We're losing a part of ourselves. It's not a kind thing, and it's not a just thing, and it's not even an effective thing for me as a father to treat one of my children like he's belligerent, rude, insensitive, unkind, unfeeling, unthinking, and to start looking for evidence of that. I love my children. I want them to succeed. I want them to understand that we all have choices, and if I can help them understand the outcomes of their choices, then they'll know what they're choosing, and they can make a conscious choice. When I have actual consequences and I can connect choice with accountability, then they're empowered to choose what they want in life and to be accountable for it. They just need to learn that they don't get to choose the outcome. So how do we cultivate an outward mindset? Well, for one thing, we need to recruit and build selflessness and teamwork. We need to start caring for others around us, whether it's staff in a community where we're working or a business where we're working or our family members. We need to care for them as people. We need to give people a voice. We need to achieve task excellence that's enabled by relational excellence. When we help people learn how to relate to each other really well, the tasks become very secondary, which is where they belong. The first step in every human interaction is to connect with the person in a meaningful way, and that starts with emotional intelligence. To really cultivate this outward mindset, we also have to allow people to be fully responsible. One of the reasons why supervisors get the job done when no one else will is because the buck actually does stop with them. And if you're the supervisor, you recognize, well, if someone else won't show up to work and I won't, then there is no one else. I am the backstop. So we need to allow others to be fully responsible for their actions and choices. We also can cultivate an outward mindset by shrinking distinctions. We can remove the differences in how we're seeing ourselves versus other people. We're all just as flawed as others. We're just flawed in different ways. And that doesn't mean that we can't work on those things. We can't support each other. But when we get inflated with our own sense of superiority, it gets us into real trouble. We can turn systems outward even. We can make sure that even the systems in our families and organizations are treating others as people and not as objects. So how do we interact in other focused ways? We can say to people things like, how can I help? Notice how that's asking the question, what would be helpful here? And we can ask that internally and we can ask it verbally. When we ask ourselves, what could I do that would be helpful? That makes a difference. We can ask, if I were to give my heart to this person, what would occur to me to do? How would I behave if I was truly giving them my heart? And as far as I'm concerned, the problem is me. If we assume that in every interaction, I'm the one that has control, I can change what I'm doing. It's not about what's justified or not. It's just really accepting the fact that either person can change and the dance changes. If you're literally doing a dance and one person changes the steps that they're doing, the dance changes by definition. And if we assume that, well, the problem's with me, therefore I can just change it, I can change dance moves, things go differently. The most important move for me to make in a relationship is to make the most important move. Usually, the things that we want other people to be doing more of are exactly the things that they need us to be doing more of. If we wish that someone spoke more kindly, they probably need us to speak more kindly to them. If we wish that someone would just be a little bit more candid, we might need to be a little bit more candid, and so on. So the Arbinger Institute sums it up by saying that we can simply see others' needs, objectives, and challenges, and we can adjust our efforts to be more helpful, and then we can measure and hold ourselves accountable for the impact of what we're doing on other people. When we can see and adjust and measure, things go differently. So here are some ways to think outside the box. Number one, look for signs of the box. If you're seeing blame, if you're seeing justification, if you're engaged in what's called horribilization, where everything is extreme, and it's the worst kind of extreme, when we're causing everything to look like it's horrible, that's a sign that we're in the box. And we might want to take a step back and say, what box am I in? How am I seeing the world? Do I think that I'm better than? Do I think that I'm worse than? Do I think I have to be seen as this thing? And as we confront those things, we can begin to understand where we might be emotionally because we're the ones that can change. We could find an out of the box place with the other person. We can find relationships that we both have a common interest in, and we can focus on that. We can focus on memories that are positive for both of us, and we can go to that out of the box place. We can do things with other people that are really happy. I have learned with my children that if I will spend time just talking to them about things that they're genuinely interested in first, before I ever invite them to help me with something, it goes better. My youngest son loves to watch basketball, and he loves to follow running because he's a runner. And he knows all sorts of statistics about different runners and who's doing this or that in the races, or how are things going in the NBA finals. And if I will spend some time talking to him about those things and go to an activity and sort of a mental space that's really good for him, we both get out of the box. And we get further because he knows that I care and he's primed to want to reciprocate. We can also ponder the situation in new ways. We can ask questions like, what are this person's challenges, trials, burdens, and pains? That's what the staff with Mrs. Tham was doing. We can ask, how am I, or the group that I'm a part of, adding to these challenges, trials, burdens, and pains? Or in what other ways have I or my group neglected or mistreated this person or group? And in what ways are my better than, worse than, I deserve, and must be seen as boxes obscuring the truth about others and myself? And how are those beliefs and viewpoints getting in the way of possible solutions? When we start to ask questions like that, we begin to unlock progress. We see ourselves more clearly, and we see where we could make changes. Lastly, we could ask, what am I feeling that I should do for this person or group? Often, when things aren't going well, if we're consciously aware of it and paying attention, we'll have an impulse. And it's usually an impulse to do something that would be really helpful. And sometimes we suppress that impulse and we keep moving on because we're so worried about whether it's justified or not and whether the other person deserves it or not. But if we can just learn to listen to that impulse in the first moment and to do something that is outward toward the other person, we'll get better results. We can also act upon what we've discovered and do what we feel like we should do. Again, it comes down to that first impulse that often is what gets us to a better place. One of the last things that I would share with you is what the Arbinger Institute calls the peacemaking pyramid. If we're engaged in conflict with another person, that's one of the toughest things to navigate. And they point out that there's sort of a hierarchy of things that have to be met. And our success at some of the higher level things depends on what happens before that. I've given you a taste of this in pointing out some of my interactions with my children. For example, the fact that with my youngest son, if we talk about basketball or track or other things that he's interested in before we try to go to other areas, it's often much more successful. The peacemaking pyramid starts with getting out of the box and having a heart that's at peace. If we are inward toward another person, we can't begin to do anything else. We first have to see them as people, not as objects. The next step is to build relationships with others who have influence. Suppose that we have a teenage child who we're having a hard time with. If we can know their friends and have a relationship with their friends and be outward toward them and be encouraging and supportive and helpful, we have some allies. Then our child might say something that's complaining about us as a parent, And what if their friend said, well, I actually really like your dad. I think he's kind. He's really interested in what I'm doing. He asks me good questions and he seems to want to know more about me. Oh, it'd be nice to have that ally. The next thing that we can do is build the relationship itself. And that often just means we got to spend time together. We need to do things that are meaningful to the other person. Next, we need to listen and learn. And listening is the most active thing we can do as humans. Most of us think that listening is relatively passive, but most of communication is everything except the words themselves. Listening is not just about the words, it's paying attention to tone and pitch and cadence and word choice and nonverbal behavior of all sorts. And that requires massive amounts of brain power. So listening is tremendously active. And if we're genuinely listening, then we're more likely to really learn something at a deeper level. When we've done all of those things that I've just talked about, then we're in a position to teach and communicate. You've heard it said, no one cares how much you know until they know how much you care. I think that's more than just a cliche. We can't begin to teach and communicate with others until we've established a relationship and we've laid the foundation and we're viewing them as a person, not as an object. Only when we've done all of those things could we then offer correction to someone. But too many of us see something that's wrong and we jump straight to correction. If we offer correction and it's not going well, that's a sign that we need to do the things that are below it. Maybe we need to be doing more teaching and communicating before we get to correction. Maybe we need to back up and make sure that we're listening more. And then we're teaching and communicating before we can get to correction. So I think this peacemaking pyramid is actually a really helpful tool. It's something tactically that we can use. If we're struggling in a relationship with someone, we can say, well, where am I? How am I trying to interact? Where am I on this pyramid? And what is right below it? Because that's probably the area where I have a problem and I need to focus more there instead of on what I think the problem is. An issue with correction is just a symptom of a teaching and communication problem, which may also rest on a listening and learning and relational kind of problem. Now, one of the things that can derail us when it comes to trying to be emotional intelligent is our own anxieties. A lot of us have a lifetime of experiences that have wired our nervous system to respond in certain ways. And when our limbic brain gets fired up, it has no capacity for language either. And we might just be flooded with hormones and neurotransmitters that are sending our system into fight or flight. And when that happens, we literally become mind blind. Our system is designed to narrow the field of vision, literally, and also to narrow our emotional sense of vision because we're just trying to survive the situation. And as long as we think a lion's about to eat us, then we're going to be in a place that is very difficult to be outward toward others because we are caught up in our own stress response. So what do we do about that? Well, first of all, as many a psychologist has put it, when it comes to emotion, if you can name it, you tame it. When you name an emotion that you or someone seems to be feeling, then you're actually putting the thinking brain more in the driver's seat. You're diverting cognitive resources toward the prefrontal cortex instead of the limbic brain, and that lightens the load for the limbic brain. Now, when it comes to naming emotion, a lot of us are just too general. We use catch-all terms like angry. Angry could be a whole lot of different things. There's a big difference between being grumpy and being disgusted with someone else. One of the hardest things to feel from another human is that they're disgusted with us. Well, are we just grumpy? Are we annoyed? Are we feeling defensive? Are we spiteful? There's a lot of different terms that we could use. And this list from Harvard Business Review Press, I think is really helpful. I share it with you as some other words to consider when you're trying to put a label on what you're feeling and what others seem to be feeling. If you're talking to someone and you think that they look a little bit embarrassed, but more than anything, you think maybe they're just kind of lonely, you might say, seems like you're feeling a little lonely here. I've said that to my children, and it's opened up a good conversation. Sometimes we can say, you seem kind of annoyed here. Am I missing something? Or is there something that we need to talk about? And when you say it in a kind tone and you genuinely are seeing them as a person who's having a hard time and you just allow them to feel, things get further. We can also deal with our own emotional experience by just remembering to breathe. Too many of us don't breathe when we're caught up in high anxiety. If you are a Navy SEAL or another Special Forces operator, one of the things that you would learn is box breathing, because box breathing leverages a physiological principle. The heart and the lungs have a bidirectional highway of nerves that connect themselves. And when your heart rate goes up, your respiratory rate goes up, because if you're pumping more blood, you need to bring in more oxygen for that blood supply. If you're breathing faster, your heart rate also goes up. When we kick into fight or flight, both our heart rate and our respiratory rate are elevated, whether we're aware of it or not. And as soon as we slow our breath rate down, that is sending signals to the heart, everything's okay here. You can calm down. And we can choose to do it intentionally, just like a sniper does before firing off a shot. You just breathe in for 4 counts through the nose, hold for 4 counts, exhale through the mouth for 4 counts, hold for 4 counts, and just repeat that a few times over. You can even subtly do that while you're listening to someone and trying to calm your system down so that you're not reactionary toward them. You're actually just listening because you're no longer in fight or flight. Lastly, we can recognize that anxiety is like a kite. If you've ever flown a kite, you know that it only stays aloft if there's tension on the string. If there's no wind, the kite won't fly. If you let go of the kite string, the kite will fall to the earth. The thing that keeps it aloft is tension on the string. And anxiety is just like that. Anxiety only stays up when there's justification or perceived justification for it. If you're literally in a horrific accident, then there's all the justification in the world for your body to be in fight or flight. But if you're in a situation where the body perceives that something's wrong, even though it's not, anxiety will only stay up as long as there's justification. And a lot of the justification comes in the form of black and white thinking. Well, what if this? And what if that? And what if this? And we look for justifications and reassurances to talk us off the ledge. I've learned that one of the most effective ways to let go of the kite string and bring anxiety down is to live in the gray at times. If what ifs are eating you for lunch, what if this happens? What if this doesn't go well? What if this person criticizes me? The answer to let go of the kite string is maybe. It's possible. That could happen. And when you learn to sit with uncertainty, as Daniel Goleman pointed out, that is a hallmark of emotional intelligence. Lastly, I would invite us all to not confuse what we or others are feeling with who we are. Feelings are just an outward manifestation of an internal state, and there's a lot of physiology wrapped up in that. We don't have to like what we're feeling. We don't have to worry about whether it's even justified or not. We can just observe it, label it, be aware of it, but we can also recognize that what we're feeling is not who we are. It doesn't have to define us. It's only when we get confused and we start having anxiety about having anxiety that things get really bad. When we start shoulding on ourselves and saying, I shouldn't feel this and I shouldn't feel that, and why am I doing that? We get all wrapped around the axle and we're not thinking clearly, because then the feeling brain is in charge instead of the thinking brain. And a balance between the two is required for emotional intelligence. Well, let's stop here today and let's go to some Q&A with those of you who are here live. Thank you for watching, and I look forward to hearing what thoughts and comments you might have for us today.